You're listening to Healthcare Now Radio. Stand by for This Just In, the latest in healthcare innovation and technology trends with your HIT advisor, Justin Barnes.
Thank you for tuning in and welcome to This Just In. I'm your host, Justin Barnes. In these half-hour segments, I'll bring you the latest advancements in healthcare, strategy, innovation, and public policy. As always, we're broadcasting from the This Just In studios on the Business Radio X network, as well as the Healthcare Now radio network. And before we dive into our special show today, I want to take a moment to let everyone know that we'll be broadcasting the This Just In radio show again live from the HIMSS annual conference in Las Vegas on Wednesday, March 7th. From 10 a.m. Pacific to 2 p.m. Pacific. Many more details to come here shortly, but I hope everyone is planning on attending the conference. If you are not, though, you'll be able to stream our radio show live at thisjustinradio.com. We'll have another great slate of CEO, CIO, leading care providers, industry thought leaders, riveting authors, and certainly policymakers joining the show. For this episode, though, my 117th episode, we're going to focus on a new book coming out called Realizing the Promise of Precision Medicine by Paul Cerrato and Dr. John Halamka. Welcome to the show, guys.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Very excited. We're going to do a special episode today, basically a double episode. There was just so much content that we were passing back and forth, prepping for the show, and so I couldn't be more excited. This is only my second one. We've done a double episode, all tied up into one big bow. So very excited about what's before us, guys. So let's dive in a little bit. John, you're very well known in the industry, and I've been on the show. You're certainly a great friend of the show. I've been on the show numerous times. But offer the background. People that may not know you that well, offer a little bit of background on you and where you're from, college, all that good stuff.
Wow. It all started when I was 12 years old, and I was a latchkey child in Southern California in the 70s with the heyday of the defense industry. And back then, they threw away all the integrated circuits that didn't test good enough for military spec. So as a 12-year-old, I ran around to dumpsters, picking up integrated circuits and taught myself analog digital logic and then microprocessors. So when I arrived at Stanford in 1979, I was the first person to have a computer in my dorm room, and the rest is history.
Actually, I've never heard that before. That is fascinating. That's awesome. So what drove you to Stanford?
Well, think about it. Late 70s, early 80s. You just had Popular Electronics publish the specifications for the Altair 8800. You could homebrew your own computer. You had this is pre-IBM PC, pre-Apple. Everybody in the industry was just starting to coalesce. And Palo Alto just turned out to be that mecca. So what a fabulous opportunity to actually sort of go to school, and I did public policy economics and biochemistry while the industry was evolving around us. It worked really well.
No, that's fascinating. I actually went out there to start Relay Health back in 1999. So we lived in Palo Alto, started the company in Alameda, and I love the Valley for how it helps you and what you learn and who you collaborate with. So it certainly was a great area. But I love where I live now in the South. So it was a great place to be then. Sounds like you were in a similar boat there. So before we dive into the show a little bit and dive into the book, what are a few secrets of your success, John? Because again, you've done very well. You are all over the place. We do see you everywhere, and we love what you do. But what are a few secrets to your success?
Well, so my brain has always done better if I take an issue, dive very deeply into it, really focus on it. And that kind of approach, I wonder, does it work any longer in 2018 when the average attention span is 3 seconds or less? Because if you take a problem and you really work it deeply and you really understand the domain, then you can have some unique insights. And I think over the course of my life, I've maybe just been in the right place at the right time where the right technology and the right problems to solve came together. So although I'd like to take credit for my sleeplessness and focus. Maybe it was more Forrest Gump and just being in that right place at the moment.
Right. Well, it helps when you're also all over the place. You happen to be in a lot of places at one time, it seems. So you happen to be, that could certainly help your success ratio and rate.
Could be, I suppose.
But also, we are in an interesting time, though, and I think you bring up a good point, because I've actually changed how I communicate with people, when I communicate, where I communicate, and how I collaborate around, this new dynamic on attention spans and how people absorb information and how they want to absorb information. So I know we're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but I'd love your 2 cents on that, because that is changing on how people just, again, absorb information, how they engage even healthcare, and how they feel about healthcare. So any quick thoughts there?
Well, as you have suggested, I've also changed my mechanisms of interaction. And, I've written 2,000 plus blog entries.
Yeah.
And what I found is writing 1,000-word blog entries, although it's very satisfying, actually isn't always the best way to communicate with cohorts. So you'll find that I'm much more active on social media now than I ever was. Mm-hmm. So I have my Facebook feed and daily comments on the industry. I have a Twitter feed. I have Instagram, and fine. That gets the message out, although admittedly, I think it's a bit superficial.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. That's actually when I did a lot of thought leadership all the way until about 2014 in written form, in blogs, in testimonies and so forth. But now I've really shifted heavily. That was where the radio show was born. It was just a new way to communicate, a new way to share thought leadership, and also collaborate with others in the industry. And even globally, where we didn't have to sit, and write on the same pieces, but also have access to the show and to broadcast in a new medium. So I agree, and that's kind of one of the ways I've personally evolved. So,
and what I also try to do is recognize that I have people working for me in their 20s. I have people working for me in their 70s. And you have to assume that not one size fits all. And so, yes, I phone, yes, I fax, yes, I email, and yes, I tweet.
Yeah.
That works.
Great wisdom there. So, Paul, let's shift a little bit. So how did this book come about? Because I've read several excerpts. This is fascinating, and this book is terrific. So, realizing the promise of precision medicine, how did you come about there?
Actually, the idea for this book started about 30 years ago. When I was in graduate school, I was working on my final dissertation, my final thesis on biochemical individuality, which is actually the biological underpinning for precision medicine. Back then, the word precision medicine didn't even exist. I was talking about the 1980s. But then over the decades, I continued to follow the research on genetic individuality and biochemical individuality and so on. And then a few years ago, Obama decided to launch the Precision Medicine Initiative. And once I saw that, I said, okay, this is time now to publish. So with that in mind, a couple of years before his announcement, John and I started working together on Information Week Healthcare. He was on our editorial board. So I knew of his expertise in healthcare IT and especially its role in personalized medicine. So I approached him and said, would you like to co-author the book? And he said, yep, great. So that was the initial impetus. And just around that time, I had just finished writing a book for Elsevier on protecting patient information. So I had a good relationship with a big name publishing company. So John and I approached him, put together a book proposal, and sure enough, the rest is history, as they say.
So how long did it take you to write this book?
How long? About a year and 3 months. I almost felt like doing another dissertation. It was really intense for both of us.
I can imagine. So let's open with population medicine versus precision medicine. What are the differences there?
Okay. Population medicine, typically you're talking about randomized controlled trials in which thousands of patients are studied, and they might divide the group into one half receives a drug, let's say, and the other half gets a placebo. And then the results are it's considered a gold standard, a randomized controlled trial. The problem with that type of a study is that it gives you results for the average patient. And there are a lot of patients who are just not average. They fall outside of the realm. And so it tends to result in a one-size-fits-all approach to healthcare. And that really is not enough for a lot of patients who have unique characteristics, who have genetic variants that are different from the average. So there's a need for a more personalized approach, and that's one of the things that we get into in the book. One of the examples that I like to use is randomized controlled trials have proven that giving patients statins, if they're at high risk for heart disease, reduces the likelihood of them getting a heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's another statistic that shows only 1 in 20 patients respond to a drug like Crestor, which is a statin. So if only 1 in 20 patients are responding, there are an awful lot of people who are not. So clearly we need a better approach to figuring out what the needs are for patients who respond and patients who don't respond. So that's what the Precision Medicine Initiative is all about.
That's fascinating. A friend of mine, have you heard of cultural intelligence by chance? There's a strategy out there, and it follows this kind of precision medicine acumen. But have you heard of that, cultural intelligence, by chance?
No, I haven't.
Have you, John?
I have not.
Okay. I mean, in short run, it bases study on your culture and basically your background. So in different ethnicities react differently to certain drugs or variances in different chemical calculations and so forth. And it's just basically it follows the lines of genomics, but yet along cultural lines. And so I can see
that being a type of precision medicine.
Exactly, it is.
The example that we used, John and I spoke at a precision medicine conference sponsored by HIMSS back in the summertime, and one of the examples that I use is you take Mrs. Smith and Mr. Patrick. Both of them have heart disease, but Mrs. Smith, 80% of her heart disease is a result of a genetic abnormality, whereas 10% is poor diet and 10% is stress. Whereas somebody like Mr. Patrick, 50% of it may be the result of psychosocial stress, and genetics is a very small part of the problem. So obviously those individuals need to be treated very, very differently, and the assessment done on them has to be very different to pick out those unique characteristics.
Very true. So, John, what are a few of the main precision medicine initiatives and programs out there? And you cover some of these in your book, great. So let's talk about those.
Yeah, sure. But let me give you a couple of different architectures. The example we use in the book is that my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer in December of 2011. There was estrogen positive, progesterone positive, and HER2 negative. She's Korean, was 50 at the time. Shouldn't any doctor or any patient be able to say, of the last 10,000 patients like me, and I don't need their names or their zip codes, there's not a privacy issue, of the last 10,000 like me, what were their treatments? What were their outcomes? What were the morbidity, mortality, side effects, and those kinds of things? So we have a tool around the 17 Harvard hospitals called I2B2 that enables us to do that kind of query. Show me, for these characteristics, other patients and their outcomes and their drugs and their issues. And we use that to refine her chemotherapy regimen, resulting in cure without the side effect of neuropathy from Taxol. As well, we are seeing that more and more companies, and there are big companies and small companies, there's established multinationals and 26-year-olds in their garages, creating cloud-hosted decision support services such that you can forward data to them and they will come back with care plans or care information or assessment of whether a drug is good or bad for a given patient based on clinical characteristics like their genome or something in their phenotype. And so there are, again, I don't endorse any particular company. I have no conflict of interest here. But we're working with a lot of these firms because we think the future is not just going to be your EHR, Epic, Cerner, Meditech, whatever. It's going to be the cloud-hosted services surrounding that EHR that really provide you the guidance to deliver precision medicine.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So what about Clinical Query and Shrine and some of the other initiatives that you talk about in programs?
Right. So with I2B2, it's in effect sending the data not to a common repository, but a application that enables you to query. So you say, how many patients like this are there? And it gives you a number, 47, right? No patient identified information.
Yep.
Send the question to the data, not the data to a repository. And Clinical Query and Shrine are just ways of doing that in a much larger scale. Shrine, for example, queries 60 academic medical centers simultaneously. With Clinical Query, what we've added to is some features to I2B2 and Shrine that we can directly now enroll patients in clinical trials. Once you find patients like who has this disease and has failed this therapy, you can then immediately get their primary care doctors to get in touch with them so that you can get them into a clinical trial.
That's excellent. I love it. That's exactly where healthcare needs to shift, and it's awesome that it's shifting there because I don't see that in a lot of places across the country, even the world. So that's excellent. And for those just tuning in, we're speaking with Paul Cerrato and Dr. John Halamka about their new book, Realizing the Promise of Precision Medicine. So, Paul, we touched on this a moment ago, but what is, and just briefly, so I'd love to dive in here a bit, what is the role of genomics in personalized medicine?
Okay, it helps to distinguish between genetics and genomics because old school genetic testing would typically involve a physician testing for a particular disease, like let's say cystic fibrosis, where you just look at one gene. Whereas genomics we now have the ability to take a patient's cells and look at their entire genetic makeup. So that's 46 chromosomes and about 20,000 genes. And the prices come down way, way down. It's like the last number I saw was $600 to do a complete genetic workup. The advantage of doing that is they can now analyze a patient's tumor to look for mutations in that tumor. And then if one of those mutations is effectively resolved with the help of a specific drug, then the patient gets that drug. So it's very, very individualized. The other side of the coin is there's something called pharmacogenomics, which is an area of research in which they're now looking at how individuals respond to specific drugs. There are certain mutations, for instance, in the liver that can, if you have that particular mutation, your liver enzymes don't break down drugs like warfarin. So that in turn affects the dose that is most effective. So the FDA has approved a long list of precision medicine drugs that have these pharmacogenomic profiles associated with them so that docs can now do that type of testing. The only problem is that a lot of docs are not really getting on the bandwagon. They're really not doing the pharmacogenomic testing. Either they don't know about it, they don't believe in it, or insurers are not covering it. So it's a work in progress right now.
Yeah, and that was going to be my follow-up to that because while the cost has come down significantly, I just don't find people offering it. And I work with an extremely advanced primary care physician in office here in Atlanta and love them. Great bedside manner, terrific medicine. They keep me, fairly healthy, which is God bless. But I have not been approached about, genetic testing or genomics or anything of the sort. And I guess I just don't hear about it. I hear, might be in the White House and there's a company that does it that's there, or someone like, we'll be out there speaking and there's companies who are doing it in individual cases. But what are some of your thoughts there on why? And I'd love to, from both of you, why don't we hear more about this? Because this is extremely important. It can be so helpful. Knowing, knowledge is power. So
Part of the reason is that physicians don't get a lot of in-depth training in medical school on genetics. So there's a whole movement now in order to re-educate docs and to do more CME seminars so that they can get educated. The other part of it is, frankly, a lot of genetic testing does not have value in primary care. I mean, if you go into the doctor's office with a sore throat, there's no reason to run a genetic testing. Whereas if you go in with prostate cancer or breast cancer, there are a lot of genes that have been recognized to be associated with those diseases. So there's more justification to do that testing. John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, certainly. So imagine, and I think, Paul, this is maybe an example you and I have discussed before, that I was the second human in the Personal Genome Project to be fully sequenced in the world. And it shows, if you want to look at my genome, feel free, personalgenomes.org, I'm too, that I will develop prostate cancer. And so I'm a vegan. I don't eat any cholesterol. I have, by genetics, very good family history, and I don't have any cholesterol issues. But yet, so the New England Journal will tell us by default we should do LDL, HDL, triglyceride, and cholesterol testing on every patient. But we should stop looking at prostate-specific antigen because over the course of the population, it really hasn't helped.
Right.
So, maybe in my particular case, if the issue is prostate cancer, as you were talking about, Paul, this idea of maybe testing for certain genetic conditions, understanding certain biomarkers, and then changing lifestyle or medications or monitoring to help avoid badness. Because, yes, ankle sprains and sore throats, no role for genetic testing. Certainly for cancers, there are.
And what about, though, like annual physicals? Or maybe you turn over 45 years old or 35 or 40 years old. Is there an argument to be made just on an annual physical to have it done at a certain age? Or are we not there yet?
Well, I have this crazy belief that what if, let's say, the cost of my genomic sequence was quite high because I was the second human. But imagine that today the cost of a full genetic sequence is about $600. If at birth every human is sequenced, and then we understand throughout your life how to tailor your care based on a single $600 investment. Yeah. Don't you think we're going to save more than $600?
Yeah, that would be cost effective, no doubt.
No, I don't think it should wait till your next physical exam. Every human should have it now at birth.
Right. Good. That's what I wanted to hear. I completely agree, and I'm going to get mine done. I love it. All right, so moving through the book. Paul, tell us about the chapter, small data, big data, data analytics, and your thoughts there.
This is the most exciting part of precision medicine, in my opinion. Data analytics, I really think, is the future of healthcare, and it's the future of precision medicine. One of the examples that we use in the book, and that we'll talk about when we speak in March, I think, there's two studies. One of them was done in 2002, the Diabetes Prevention Program. And they took about 3,000 patients who were at risk for diabetes. They didn't have it. And they split them up into three groups. One was a control group. One group got metformin, which is a popular diabetes drug. And the third group was given an intensive lifestyle program. So then when they did all the analysis, they found that the two experimental treatments did lower the likelihood of getting diabetes, but only a percentage of patients had less risk. So like you take 1,000 patients, you put them on metformin, about 7 of them got diabetes and 300 of them didn't. The problem was the researchers couldn't figure out from day one which patients would and would not get the disease. So they had to take the drug, or they had to go through the intensive program and get no benefit from it. Mm-hmm. Despite that fact, the researchers said, wouldn't it be great if the millions of patients who are at risk for diabetes be put on one of these two programs? Well, that's really not justified. So along comes a researcher named Jeremy Sussman, University of Michigan, and they did a much deeper analysis of the raw data from the diabetes prevention trial. And instead of just looking at 3 risk factors, being overweight, having abnormal fasting blood glucose, and having an abnormal glucose tolerance test, they looked at 17 risk factors, and they plugged it into the sophisticated data analytics program. And what they were able to do was figure out more precisely who would be most likely to get the disease and who would most likely not get the disease. So it really gave them a precision approach to predicting the disease and figuring out who should get the treatment and who shouldn't. So that's the type of research that is really going to transform healthcare.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. John, anything you want to add to that on the data? I mean, the importance of data. That's a big topic, but I think you're a leader here, so I'm going to give you a chance here too. So.
Sure. So one of the challenges we have with healthcare data is much of our healthcare data is bad. and what do I mean by that? So you can't see my hands, but on my left hand I have a turkey bite, and on my right hand I have a pig bite. This is what happens when you run an animal sanctuary. Mm-hmm. So I showed my hands to a primary care doc, and I said, well, you, of course, go into my medical record and codify that I have animal bites and specify the species. And he said, are you kidding me? You have 12 minutes to see the patient, enter 140 data elements, have 40 quality measurements, never commit malpractice, and be empathetic. I'll just say abrasion.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. What if I develop some bizarre zoonosis, an infection caused by an animal? And there's zero record of my ever being bitten by an animal. So we just have to understand that the healthcare data as recorded today has limitations.
I could not agree more. I'll bring up some good points. So at that, we're going to take a quick pause here for a station break, but we'll be right back after these messages.
You are listening to Healthcare Now Radio. For program information and schedules, visit us at www.healthcarenowradio.com.
Welcome back, and thank you to everyone for joining us. My guests today are Paul Cerrato and Dr. John Halamka, and we're discussing their new book, Realizing the Promise of Precision Medicine. Well, thank you, gentlemen. So continuing on our discussion, we just covered small data, big data, and data analytics, and a couple of great examples by both of you. And it's kind of ironic. I was watching a story last night just on Atlanta and where a lot of our boom is in our economy. And healthcare technology is one of the leaders, but coming up behind that very quickly is fintech. And then just is big data in general, because obviously big data feeds fintech. Big data feeds healthcare IT. It feeds, obviously information technology across the board. So it's kind of ironic that they plan on data and just big data in general, and data scientists as being one of the biggest drivers of our economy in Atlanta over the next 5 years. So it's kind of cool. And again, that story was just last night here in Atlanta. So, but Paul, what's the role of mobile technology in EHRs around personalizing healthcare? And obviously near and dear to my heart, I'm one of the early people, investors in Greenway Medical, and we had a lot of fun with that company. But what are your thoughts there, mobile technology and EHRs?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, we hear a lot of criticism from thought leaders about whether precision medicine is ever going to have clinical benefits. Some of them say, yeah, somewhere down the road, but not right now. But in terms of diabetes care, mm-hmm. and the role of mobile apps, that's happening right now. There are a number of effective mobile apps that physicians and patients can use together to track their blood glucose levels, and it's having a very real impact on the course of their disease. There's a mobile app by a company called Blue Star that's used for type 2 diabetes, and at least one study that we mentioned in the book has demonstrated that it can lower hemoglobin A1C levels by about 2%, and that's a significant number. So it's real, it's happening now. It's just a question of getting enough clinicians on board to start using these apps and figuring out a way to use them without the physician spending an unusual amount of time, since, as John said, typically they've only got 15 to 20 minutes per patient visit. Yeah. John, you want to talk about the EHRs in this respect?
Yeah.
Sure. So I have 7 petabytes of patient-identified data in the Beth Israel Deaconess EHR, 2 million patients going back to 1977. Do you think that if the EHR is just a dumb database recording transactions about an encounter, that doctors are going to like it or find it useful? How much does your doctor love their EHR? Not so much. So what needs to happen is that the EHRs need to be a tool you look forward to using because they're turning the data into wisdom. That as you go to take an action, what you're getting is the benefit of decision support and care planning customized to that patient's history and that patient's care preference. And suddenly, the EHR becomes an essential tool and not just a dumb data entry vehicle or word processor for you. And EHR vendors and, as we mentioned, the third parties that connect to them are very much thinking about how to enhance usability and reduce the burden on clinicians. That's where we hope it goes.
Yep. No, agree. Have you guys, you know Andy Uri. Do you know Dr. Uri by chance, guys? He did a company.
Sure.
Okay. He did a company, along these lines. I believe he was trying to bring genomics, genetics inside of EHRs and help with that technology. I don't know if you guys have seen that technology or remember him bringing that up.
I have worked with a cloud-hosted company in San Diego that is doing that same sort of thing. Okay. And the idea being that, there's thousands of rules, and those rules are changing on a daily basis. So what you want to do is curate the rule set in one place, not try to have every hospital system in America try to curate their own rule set. Right. Beth Israel Deaconess has 2,000 rules. The Brigham has 2,000 rules. They're totally different rules.
Right.
So the idea of being able to query aggregates of rules, send the data to those rules, and get an intelligent response. And there are a couple of companies doing that.
Excellent. So this is for both of you. Start off with you, John. What are a few recommendations for overcoming the barriers and limitations of precision medicine?
Well, first, there has to be an economic incentive to do it. And in a fee-for-service world, of course, we're happy when you come to the hospital. Wait, we don't want you to be sick. We want you to be well. So why don't you pay us for outcomes and quality instead? Suddenly, if that's the motivation, then, as we talked about, sequencing you at birth,
makes sense.
Custom tailoring your care plan, avoiding the wasteful statin that does nothing will be the right motivation. So probably a combination of economic incentives, maybe a little workflow redesign, and sure, some better tools to help you get to the answers quicker.
So to put you on the spot a little bit here, are there one or two initiatives out there that you see, maybe you're a part of, that you can say, you know what, these are good steps in the right direction? I know there's a lot of little things happening, but anything that kind of rises above the fray or the daily activities that you would like to highlight that are good steps in this direction?
Well, I could say machine learning and a cloud-hosted blockchain with mobile APIs. Does that help?
It does.
Just kidding. So the Argonaut initiative, which is the way of creating these FHIR implementation guides that make it trivially simple for electronic health records to get and put clinical decision support information to third parties, will help a lot. If we're going to get to this ecosystem of apps and cloud-hosted services, having the interoperability that makes it very simple is important. And you'll find that just Google Argonaut project. You'll find all the details.
Yep. Nope. Argonaut's made some great strides over the last several years. So, Paul, what are some of your recommendations for overcoming these barriers in precision medicine and limitations?
I think one of the barriers that docs are dealing with is the mindset that we already practice precision medicine. We practice personalized medicine. We don't need to learn anything more. We don't need a $200 million project. And to a certain extent, that's true. You go into a doctor's office, let's say you need a statin, or you need to have your blood lipids lowered. Before they give you a statin, they'll ask questions like, do you have liver disease? Okay, you have liver disease? Well, I got to give you something different. So that's personalization up to a point. But as we're going to bring out when we speak in March, it's precision medicine or personalized medicine with a lowercase p. it's not really what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for is to dig into the root causes of disease, to figure out all the contributing, interlocking risk factors that cause disease. And then once we figure those out, then to really personalize medicine, rather than simply say, okay, you don't take a statin, or if you have an infection, we won't give you penicillin because you're allergic to it. Those are the baby steps that are now being taken. But what we really need to do is go way beyond that, and that's something that we discuss in the lecture in March. So it's about changing the mindset. Yes, personalized medicine exists today, but we can do so much more, and you folks have to be open-minded to those new changes.
Yep. No, excellent point. So let's shift a little bit over to interoperability. John, you just brought that up as a key factor here. So how do you see or want interoperability handled with personalized patient care?
So a couple of things. You often read about information blocking, and I'm very controversial. I say I have never seen such a thing. If there is a technology platform, a good policy, and a business case, data will flow. So where are some of the areas we need to do a bit more? The challenge, of course, is, well, maybe if your name is Justin Barnes, you're okay because there aren't so many of those in the U.S. But if your name is Joe Smith, you're never going to have precision medicine that combines data from all the sites of care using your name and date of birth, right? It just doesn't work. So you need some nationwide patient matching strategy. We need a bit more uniform policy, right? Because in New Hampshire, it's illegal to send data to public health. Too much government. Whereas in Massachusetts, it's required. So wait, I can step on two sides of a state line and have totally different interoperability requirements? That's nutty.
Yeah.
And of course, what we want is some public-private partnerships to create some infrastructure that just makes data exchange very simple, such as a provider directory of every doctor and hospital and their electronic address. Wouldn't that be great? Because right now, sure, your EHR can send data electronically. You just have no idea where to send it to.
Mm-hmm.
Those are a couple of things in addition to FHIR that will really help interoperability.
So move along those lines. Are there any initiatives, again, that you would point to? They say, hey, you know what? This framework is doing a good job. It's not the end all be all, but it's a good step in the direction. Is there anything out there that you would like to get? No, I like this, or this could move us in the right direction. Are there any framework, structures, agreements, initiatives that you want to highlight?
Sure. Well, I'll give you two examples. So I'm working with the Gates Foundation in Africa to unify the HIV data of South Africa. Mm-hmm. Challenge there is they don't have a national healthcare identifier or nationwide patient matching strategy, and they have names, genders, dates of birth just as problematic as ours. Mm-hmm. So we've decided to deploy iris scanners in all the clinics and tag your individual laboratory results with a link to your iris scan. So all you do is show up at any clinic in the country and say, I've seen those irises before, and here is all the precision data about you. So we've already started the pilot, and hopefully in the course of the next year, we'll roll out very broadly. So, if it works in Soweto, maybe it'll work in Boston. I mean, it's a thought.
Right.
So that's certainly one initiative. Other initiatives, the Pew Charitable Trust is about to issue a major report on a year worth of work on creating a nationwide patient matching strategy, looking at all available policies, technologies, and pilots. And so I think that will help move us forward. So, I don't want to say anything political, but I think maybe the last administration took more of a government-oriented role in leading innovation. I think the next 3 to 4 years will belong to the private sector. So watch innovations coming out of the private sector.
Yeah, excellent. Great advice. And for those just tuning in, we're speaking with Paul Cerrato and Dr. John Halamka about their new book, Realizing the Promise of Precision Medicine. And we'll also touch on HIMSS here in a little bit. But before we do that, Paul, how do we protect patient privacy here and implement the best security on data? I know that you have some great studies here, so I'd love to hear this.
Yeah, good question. I actually spent an entire year investigating this question, and it resulted in the publication of my first book, Protecting Patient Information. There are a lot of very simple steps that small and medium-sized practices can take in order to protect patient information. But one of the first obstacles that they have to overcome is the unwillingness by decision makers to spend the money. You look at a chief CEO, for instance, of a small hospital, and he or she is trying to decide, should I put $1 million into the next MRI machine, which is going to generate a lot of revenue immediately, or should I put $1 million into shoring up our security system? The temptation is to go with the first one because you don't see an immediate return on investment on security. The problem is down the road, you may lose millions of dollars once your protected health information has been compromised in terms of HIPAA fines, in terms of class action lawsuits, in terms of a damaged reputation in the public, because once you get a big breach like that, you are required by law to inform the media. And once the media finds out, you never know where it's going to go. So the question comes of what are the simple, relatively inexpensive steps to take in order to shore up your healthcare system, shore up the data in the healthcare system. Obvious things like encrypting mobile devices.
Yep.
A lot of laptops have been stolen with sensitive information that wasn't encrypted, and the result was expensive HIPAA fines. Things like updating your antiviral programs, training physicians and other staffers to create easy to remember but hard to forget passwords. And there are certain tricks that you can do to do that. I mean, you don't want to use a password like 1234 or your pet's name,
right? Because
there are now password cracking software that can go through every word in the alphabet in a few minutes. So you've got to come up with something a little more original than that. Other things that come to mind are doing a detailed risk assessment to figure out where in your computer network are the weaknesses, because you can't address the weaknesses unless you really know what they are. So go one by one through every device, through every system you have to figure out where the vulnerabilities are. And then if you need to, you bring in an outside expert to address them. There's so many things you can do. And the very last thing, probably the most important thing in my mind, is training employees to avoid phishing scams.
Mm-hmm.
The employees are the weakest link in security in any hospital or any practice. And it's so easy to fall into temptation. You see an email that says, this is a great shopping site. Why don't you jump in here? And it's sent by your best buddy down the road. But actually, it wasn't sent by your best buddy. And once you click on the link, now you've got malware on your computer, and before long, the hackers are into all the sensitive patient information.
Yep. No, that's great advice. And I know that I have security guests on my show probably about every quarter. And I know one of the big ones also is whitelisting software and basically having set websites that employees can visit that we know are safe, and they just can't get to any website just because they're hitting on phishing software will send you to wherever. You basically go through this whitelisting strategy, and it really can help your organization stay secure and not fall prey.
Good advice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and moving right along, got about 10 minutes or so left. So real quickly, from both of you, I'll start off with you, Paul. What's your advice and thoughts for consumer and patient engagement? How do we, increase this? I know this is actually, we saw one of these recent announcements from Amazon and Berkshire Hathaway and JP Morgan, and engagement is high on their list and trying to, help our healthcare system. What are some of your thoughts there?
I think patient engagement is a two-edged sword in that both the clinician and the patient has responsibility. Clinicians don't always know the reaction that patients have to their comments. It's very rare that a patient who leaves the practice and complains to his neighbor, but Dr. Smith really was very insensitive. Mm-hmm. The doctor never hears that. There's an interesting program at Cleveland Clinic where they're actually teaching docs to develop better relationships with patients by giving feedback as to what their patients have actually said about them after they leave the practice. So part of it is a more sensitive clinician, but also part of it is the patient has to take a certain amount of self-responsibility. There's a whole movement now referred to as the activated patient. A lot of folks are starting to say, okay, I'm not going to leave my healthcare in the hands of my doctor. I'm going to learn all I possibly can, and when I go in, I'm going to make it clear that this is what I understand. What can we do about it? So it's a two-edged sword.
Mm-hmm. Yep. No. John, anything you want to add to that?
Well, certainly. So as you know, interoperability always usually takes two forms: provider-to-provider data exchange and provider-to-patient to provider exchange. And as you've seen with Apple's new announcement in iOS 11.3, the intent is it will be trivially simple, using these Argonaut standards for a phone to host your lifetime medical information, and you, the patient, can do with it what you will. Share it with family, or forward it to a clinical trial, or bring it to a new caregiver. And so to me, making the tools just simple and really effortless has got to be the best way to engage patients and families.
Love it. Great advice. So shifting here a little bit now to our HIMSS 18 crystal ball. You're always a great guest. You guys will be on my show during HIMSS annual conference again this year. But what are some of the trends, John, that you see in major themes coming up for annual conference in HIMSS?
My worry is that just like we saw big data on every booth last year, we're going to see blockchain on every booth this year. And I'm the editor of Blockchain in Healthcare, a new peer-reviewed journal. And there are use cases for which blockchain is helpful, but by no means is it a panacea, nor does it replace any relational data store we already have. So, you know, I already mentioned some of the Gartner hype curve terms. So it's going to be machine learning and AI. It's going to be, you know, certainly we'll probably see some precision medicine out there, care management, population health, and blockchain.
Excellent. I couldn't agree more. So what are some of the, trends that you're specifically addressing that you're most excited about for 2018 and 2019?
Sure. So I have Amazon and Google employees embedded in my organization working on novel machine learning approaches for real-world simple problems. This isn't, I'm going to replace the doctor with machine learning. Right. No. This is, well, Justin Barnes has done 1,000 appendectomies, and he can do them in 25 minutes with high quality. Whereas Paul has only done 3 appendectomies, and he takes 2 hours. But yet, we allocate 2 hours of OR time for every appendectomy. Why? That's dumb, right? So we're working with Amazon to build OR schedules that are allocated based on your experience with a procedure and the patient's specifics. Or how is it that I make sure patients show up to their appointment? And how do I address capacity and throughput issues? So it's these kinds of novel applications that use these emerging technologies to solve very tractable problems that excite me.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I've been collaborating with Amazon and the Alexa app with Lenovo, and basically some of the best practice that we've learned out in the field is kind of voice first, but not voice only. And we brought this up in a think tank that I'm a part of. But and just the importance. So you bring up, I mean, AI and machine learning can teach us so much. We're just scratching the surface, but it's these kind of little things, like I said, voice first, but not voice only, because this is going to help patients and engagement and so forth. So, no, excellent. So, and this is kind of the fun aspect. I like to shift the show a little bit now. We touched on HIMSS 18. Very excited for that conference. But now, personally, John, where do you invest in your community, and what charities do you support? This is something, as I get older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I spend more time, my personal time, and even some of my business time. But where do you invest your time, talent, and treasures?
Okay, well, this is going to sound possibly self-interested, so I want to be careful. But you know that 5 years ago, my wife and I established Unity Farm and Unity Farm Sanctuary, a 501c3, for the rescue of sick, abandoned, and abused animals. And so I donate 1/2 of my earnings every year to animal rescue. And today we have 250 animals on 70 acres, and we provide their lifetime forever homes. So that's certainly where I spend a fair amount of my energy and resources.
Wow. That is, yeah, and I just started to learn more about that over the last couple of months, and John, it's fantastic. So I look forward to hearing more. It's not self-serving at all. This is exactly why I want to have people like you on the show. And Paul, I'd love to hear a couple of your thoughts here. Where do you invest in your community or charities that you support?
Actually, one of the I don't know if you'd call it charity, but our local fire department uses volunteer fire departments, and I think that's a worthy cause. I don't especially like giving money to charities that I know nothing about or that are nationwide and spend a lot of their money on administrative costs.
Sure.
So when I give money to the local fire department, I know that it's going to benefit people, right here in the community. So that's where I like to put some of my money. And in terms of personal interests, music is one of my passions. So I have a recording studio that does a lot of fun stuff when I'm not writing books and thinking about data analytics.
No, that's fantastic. And I appreciate your investment of time with the fire department. I served in the military for 6 years. And the best thing I ever did was to serve this country and serve someone other than myself. So thank you for that, Paul. And obviously, John, love what you do. That's near and dear to my heart. So real quickly here, kind of the last question for you, John. Paul just mentioned his music studio and his recording studio. But what is your favorite place to get or be inspired?
Wow, of course, traveling the world with 400,000 miles a year, there's so many possibilities. But 4 years ago, I built a tree house on the farm property. And the tree house, which does have a strong Wi-Fi connection, by the way,
that's great,
is where I go in order to do the deep learning, the writing, the thought, and the retreat. It's in a 150-year-old maple tree, 35 feet off the ground, and it is unlikely I'll be bothered there.
Wow.
And I've seen that tree house. It's very impressive.
That's awesome. Very cool. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to do this show. You both are a true pleasure, and our industry is lucky to have you both. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Justin.
Enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah. And great to have everybody join us as well. And thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to take time with us. And thank you again for listening. And please tune in weekdays at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, 11:30 a.m. Pacific. As always, you can track me on Twitter at HIT Advisor and use the hashtag ThisJustinRadio so you can respond to your comments from the show. If you missed this episode or any aspect of the episode and want to hear more, you can always check them out on Apple iTunes, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, Google Play, and TuneIn. So we've really broadened our outreach and very excited to have all those partners now part of This Justin Radio show. And also you can check out our new website that we've launched at justinbarnes.com. Thanks, everyone. Have a terrific week.